and feel free to kind of be part of that conversation. It's just, a bit of fun, and last time
sometimes it's awkward with the guest, and that's totally fine. Just
but,
lean into it. It's okay.
but so
No,
last
totally
time,
fine. I keep confusing who is Mikkel, who is Tony. Who is Mikkel, by the way?
There we go. I think that's what it was.
Was that the intro then?
Is it confusing because of the lack of hair? Both of us, probably that's probably the reason. Tony is the guy with the shirt all the time.
And I'm the person with the glasses.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's it.
Anyway,
all right.
Maybe other viewers have the same problem. Who knows?
Yeah.
So, Mikkel, whom are we having here as a guest here today?
We have Arun from Pleo, CRO Pleo. Arun, welcome to the show. Wonderful to have you.
I'm super excited. Thank you, guys.
So you are working at Pleo today. You were at Freshwork. We were just reminiscing about your 5.5-year stint in Germany as well.
Yeah. Arun also speaks German.
Yeah, exactly. And my teacher literally said, for you to succeed, just do extremely short sentences. Then it's limited how much you can screw it up. Just to put it into perspective.
My children grade my German very poorly. If they hear this, they'll be like falling off the chair.
Well, I think that's just, how it is to be a parent. They will kind of grade you poorly on a lot of things. So for me, it's not the German. It's
stop projecting, Mikkel. Okay?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Back to you, Arun. So you work at Pleo. You have previously been at Freshworks and at Nexus. Had a stint there, and today I believe you're managing a fairly big team over there. Tell us a little bit about the work you do at Pleo.
Yeah, I think very quickly, my background is I'm a very atypical CRO in the sense of I'm an engineer first and foremost, 2 engineering degrees, and almost worked as an engineer for almost half a decade or more, and a product manager, and then did consulting stint as a second avatar of my career. Since then, it's been mostly growth scaling, 2 companies. Now Pleo is the third. In Pleo, my mandate cuts across exactly the soup to nuts of the customer journey, from marketing to sales, pre-sales, customer success and such. Mm-hmm. So roughly we have close to 450 or so people who are serving 30,000 customers all in. Mm-hmm. So it's a fairly complex operation because we also cater to 2 segments, both the SMB and mid-market, and also 7 core countries. So you can imagine the complexities that comes with it, but that's what makes it fun.
And I guess it basically means that the leaders of each department, they roll into you, or how's that set up?
That's right. So we have an interesting structure. Most companies have a matrix type structure. We have something called an domain structure. So we call if there is a big problem statement or a problem area, we have a domain, and the domain has a leader, and they will have people from all kind of tribes or competencies. Let's say so like for instance, our SMB team includes not just salespeople, but also engineers and product managers, because we are investing heavily in product-led growth motions and such.
I think just to kind of give a frame for some folks, right? Because lots of people listening are from your region basically. Quite a lot are actually also from the US, right? And I think Pleo is not a big name yet in the US. Not sure what the plans are. Kind of the Pleo is basically the European version of Ramp, right? And you guys are growing just as crazily, I would say. And basically kind of behind this, around 100 million in ARR-ish right now. We don't want to be too exact around that. And growing still at a breathtaking, 80% plus kind of pace year over year, right? So this is the kind of operation that Arun is running here, just to give everyone listening in a bit of a feel for what the depth, the complexity, and also kind of the value of those insights actually might be coming out of here today. So just to kind of provide that a little bit.
Maybe a couple of things I would add, Mikkel, is I think we like to consider Ramp as the Pleo of US. But I have to say they are executing extremely well, and we take inspiration from them. We even share investors. And also we are growing faster than that, but that's for another day. But net, we're in a good spot, yeah.
Basically, we wanted to bring you on because we've talked a couple of times about hypergrowth. It is just so interesting to have someone who is in it, who is in that company right now, especially in this market we're operating in, right? And kind of unveil what are some of the tenets and challenges of working in that kind of environment. And maybe just to kind of kick us off, I think quite often what you see out there are the great stories, all the things that went really well, but also you just have some of the things you said now. You have multiple segments, multiple markets growing at breakneck speed. I'm sure there must be a lot of growing pains that come with that. And you also worked at other fast scaling companies. So I'm curious maybe whether there's some kind of challenge or something you've experienced to that end that you can share with us and the listeners.
Yeah, it's growing fun actually. I always say, if there are no pains, why are we here? That's what we are here to steer. And we have a great leadership team which looks at it as growth opportunities and fun. There's quite a lot. And Michael, as you correctly pointed out, when you are growing at that breakneck speed, you are actually constantly there stretching the system at its seams. Every assumption you make is expires in 6 months or 1 year. Every decisions you made, it's almost like a child growing so fast. The clothes don't fit no more. You're constantly changing the structures and so. So I think the biggest learning, I would say, is the people side of things. Because when you're growing at such high speed, uh, it's not about change management. It's about constantly managing change. And to be able to doing that, you need to have the right people with the right growth mindset who are constantly, swinging with you as a speedboat would. If you're all tacking left and they all tack right, it's going to capsize. So that is the biggest, I would say, challenge at a growth, hyper growth stage, especially when you are starting to involve people that's more than a tribe. 50 people is a tribe. You can stand up and have an all hands. You can talk to it. Suddenly, when you talk 500 people, the energy you need to have to put into the change management and the inputs you have to take and constantly do for you to continuously adapt to the conditions that's constantly changing. That's the biggest challenge I've seen.
And you kind of teased it a little bit early on, talking about those domains and domain leadership, right? So this is,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe this is some experience that actually you kind of carried through from Freshworks, which almost kind of has a similar journey potentially in some of those areas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say, starting out, that's not how most organizations organize around those domains, right? This is something actually from more of a product management perspective that people do this whole kind of flock thing, right?
Yeah.
Did this come, did I guess right? Did this come from your product and engineering past, or is this actually an outcome of a growing pain? You saw something, you were hitting the ceiling, something wasn't working out, and it's like, hey guys, I think we need to rethink this whole thing, and we need to implement this. Let's call it this domain expertise here.
I think I want to give credit where credit is due. Even though I come from the product background, I was more like a old school thinker. But this came from mostly some of the Nordic companies that scaled ahead of us. So good examples would be Klarna and Spotify. So we had a lot of folks from Klarna. And there it was more about how our teams configured towards problem spaces. A good example is, let's take customer success and or SMB. In customer success, a customer success team, there's a traditional playbook what they should do. Look at the high value customers, look at have a steady cadence, build trust, do QBRs or whatever. There are a lot of different mechanisms on how they do. At the end of the day, they're evangelists for the product to solve the customer need, and they have some of the most closest connection with the customers on a day-to-day basis. Wouldn't it be great if they are actually tightly linked to the product teams, whichever they are, to solve something much quicker? So we are able to also go back to the customer saying that problem is fixed. So that's one example of how do we do tight collaboration. Another example is the SMB segment where the unit economics doesn't work, at scale for a people-led model. So it's more like how do we automate things constantly, and that's one way to make your workforce more productive. But an even bigger leap would be how do we bring that messaging that you want to talk to tell the customer in the product itself, so it becomes super intuitive. Just like the classic saying is, you don't have to teach how to use an iPad to a kid. Just give it to them, you'll see what they do. So the product should be so intuitive, easy to use, and the learning is very, very iterative in the lower end of the market. For us to be able to, as we top up the funnel, it should go friction free end to end. And so there are certain areas where it lends itself to that domain structure. Certain areas doesn't as much, but we continuously iterate and learn with the new model we've been trying.
So what just strikes me listening to you, right? So CRO is a title that's, being loosely attached to all kinds of different roles almost. Kind of, I think the most traditional one is like you have a a sales leader that's growing up and then, basically kind of gets the C level, and then they call themselves CRO. Then you have
Yeah,
CROs that basically include sales and post sales. And then you have go to market wide CROs that basically include also marketing, right? The way you talk about the world very much is customer and product centric, actually, which is pretty cool. And I don't hear this all the time, of CROs thinking about the world like this. So it almost triggered this question, in those domains, right?
yeah.
The the product folks in there, they are still technically part of the product organization, right? They're not part of, the go to market team, so to speak. Is just for clarity's sake.
Yeah. So here, this is where the distinction is. In a lot of matrix organization, that's the
Yeah.
case. But in our case, what we do is they are part of the tribe. Say they are
Hmm.
part of the product tribe or engineering tribe. We call it competency.
Hmm.
But what they build, what they do, is decided by the domain leader who is part of the go-to-market organization.
Hmm.
So another example is marketplaces and yeah, partnerships.
Hmm.
Same thing. They have a very hard goals to actually increase the partnerships, actually
Hmm.
end to end, and various customer touch points. But they cannot do that without having a product angle that is attached to it,
Hmm.
be it an integration with the HRMS system or a travel system and such. The strength of the product is actually directly linked to the strength of the value that you can bring together by a combined product value proposition.
Yeah.
Now, that could be part of the core product, and some companies they do it, but it's better if it is linked directly to the go to market organization because the urgency and the link to the revenue is quite high.
I totally agree with that. And I think actually this is a way of thinking that more folks at a certain scale, right? Let me just
Mhm.
be clear, right? If you're single product, single segment, single market, I don't think this makes a ton of sense, right? Kind of that complexity level. But once
No.
you get to a certain scale, where you then basically kind of land up in this siloed land, not just GTM versus product versus finance, but siloed even within go to
Yeah,
market, right?
absolutely. In fact, Tony, you could say when a company is small, the whole company is a domain, more or less, right? They all work with one goal. But when it gets bigger, and I'm also saying it doesn't work in all situations. So when we have a very sales-led motion, where it's very much like a sales functional organization, they have the best practices and everything. And in that case, the team that's building the product that is selling, they're two separate teams.
Mhm.
Only in areas where the synergy is very high, we combine them, put under a single leader, and to make it work.
I've one more
Go
thing
for it.
here because I was on a smaller scale. Plan Day is kind of one of the Nordic HR players almost. Um, but we had one other challenge, and I just wanted to kind of ask you about this because you are with fintech, you're in a highly regulated space as well, right? All of the different
Yes.
markets have kind of different requirements. You have different competitors, you have different, partnerships and so forth. Um, how was the conversation, when you moved into this domain expertise around should we do the domain expertise around the segments or should we do the domain expertise around the markets? Did you have that conversation? And I mean, we know how you
Yeah.
how you went in the end, but what were the reasons why you switched one way rather than the other?
Yeah, we did definitely have the debate. You could basically create a domain by country, for
Mhm.
instance. That's probably what you mean. And it's about the similarities. Where is the 80/20?
Mhm.
So we went with the, let's say, the SMB segment across Europe was the purchase behavior, how they do was very similar, but their last mile requirements are different. But we basically combine them so it's pan European. Now let's assume we go to the US, and there maybe our product is not as extensible into US. Maybe we have to have a US as a separate mini domain or a separate company, and that's what I hear in some companies. European companies that go to US often fail.
Mhm.
They fail to capitalize. They look at the market size they want to go, but they do it as a mode of product extension rather than it's almost should be another company. And Klarna is the one which has succeeded, and that's the approach they have followed, which is it's almost everything is replicated for such a large continental market. And in those scenarios, that cut might make sense. For now, we are within Europe in 7 countries. The cut around the segment made a lot more sense.
So one of the things that goes through my mind right now is you must and the team must face a lot of context switching all the time when you talk together because you have all these different segments and markets. How do you
Yeah.
bring clarity into the conversation and keep your eye on the ball as a team and as a CRO?
So this is a, a very interesting point because it's about we have to go back to the first principles in this case to find what are the common threads. Like say there are forums we have where we discuss the common threads, and it's so hard sometimes. A particular regional nuance always seeps in. I have to swat it away or train the workforce to say that's not for this conversation. But we need to create a separate event or a forum for that. So we try to have at a country level strategy, even though we have a company level strategy, because of our product is highly regulated and distinctly different by countries. Let's say if I take a product like Asana, it will be 95% the same, the Asana in the US, and maybe 5% localized. In our case, it's almost 70-30 because we integrate with the different local types of banks for money transfers and things like that, especially when post-Brexit, the UK and such. Or we also have, last mile things like per diem, mileage, how does it, accounting systems, very, very different. So we try to carve it out. So we try to focus on the core threads, that anything that's at the core thread that actually helps every single customer are discussed at the global forums. But we create separate forums for country level things. So we are not always, optimizing for a global maximum, because if you do it that way, the biggest market gets always the pie, which will be UK for most European countries, or Germany for that matter. So the smaller countries will get swatted away, their prioritization and everything. So we create separate forums for that. And based on the business case, we invest according to each country and also the maturity of each country in their own maturation journey.
Okay, I think that's an interesting way to look at it, because my next question was going to be, how do you manage and plan the growth? And I think part of it, you gave a little part of the answer here. You build a business case by market to determine, because the product is such a
Mm-hmm.
big factor, to determine what
Mm-hmm.
you're going to do. But still, you also have different tactics, whether it's SMB and mid market. I don't know if you do accountants as well, if that's a different game entirely, right? So how do you manage, when you're growing at this breakneck speed?
Mm-hmm.
And I saw, was it 2 years ago you opened with a bang in several markets almost the same day, it felt like, right? So
Yeah.
so how do you go about planning those kind of next steps you're going to take as a business to keep on being at the growth rate you're on?
Yeah. I think I go back to first principles, right? So let's talk about planning. In planning, you essentially have 3 major variables you are playing with, right? One side is the revenue envelope, how fast you want to grow; cost envelope, how much you can invest; and then the people envelope, that includes things like what capabilities and everything you have. On the other side of the spectrum, you already have something going, and if you look at it, let's take 2 cuts. One dimension is the segment. Which segments are you in the early alpha, beta, or a full throttle phase, and which country you are in the alpha, beta, or full throttle phase. So now you have a complex matrix of saying, let's take there is in this country, let's say in Denmark, in this segment, we have a solid product market fit, and we want to go full throttle. And you look at the unit economics, whether it's CAC to LTV or any of the ratio, and say how much more TAM is there, how much more you can go, and how much more that then goes back to the number of people you want to hire and the cost envelope which you can operate. And you have to take the same approach, kind of cell by cell. If I put a
Mhm.
3-dimensional matrix, each cell has a different answer. So your ability to plan at that level gives you a lot more predictability when it comes to. Otherwise, what will happen is you might still hit your target, but you don't know which engine fired, which engine failed to fire. But you're able to do at that level by country, by segment, and based on their maturity, whether it's a pilot or it's the beta or is it like full throttle, you are able to create. And this maturation also happens over time. And most companies at this stage, whatever I'm saying might be all Greek and Latin, because they wouldn't have the data plumbing, they wouldn't have the models to actually measure all this. We didn't have 3 years ago. Now we put in place everything so we can go to each cell and figure out exactly what's happening.
So you talked about, you know, predictability, planning, and so forth, right? I think for me personally, those two things are connected through execution, right? Kind of really at the end of the day, the plan needs to be executed. You need to course correct, and that's how you become predictable. It's not that you end up hitting the plan exactly like you laid out. You might hit the revenue number, but how you in the end got there, that's you maneuvering, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you know, there was very recently we kind of cited this in some of our content pieces. There was very recently an open view, you know, one of the VCs out of the US, kind of early stage. Not sure if you're familiar with them. They did a benchmark and they asked
benchmark
a
study.
couple of
Yeah,
founders. Asked a
Mhm.
couple of founders, hey folks, what's top three priorities for you? What are you most worried about going forward? Right. So this is very topical,
Mhm.
very recent. And the number one by far, we're talking like 75% of founders said that versus 50% the other thing. They said go to market execution is our, you know, this is what we're worried about every single day. Right. And I
Yeah,
think it's, you know, it's connected to some of the, you know, growth at all costs and the change and the capital markets and all of these things. But really, kind of what then happened for us was like, okay, cool, go to market execution seems to be a big issue for folks. But, you know, what is, from your perspective, what does that actually mean? What is GTM execution, right? And then number
Mhm.
two, if you have a couple of items around, I would be love to hear what does it mean for you being good at it? You know, what, how do you become good at it if you're currently worried around this? Would
yeah.
love to hear your thoughts on this.
I think again, if you go to first principles, this problem was more acute now, right? Uh, 3 years ago, or even 2 years ago, there was money was going plenty. It's like there was one metric everybody was looking at, which was growth rate.
Mm-hmm.
Now suddenly they want to look at 5 metrics, not just growth rate, how efficiently you grow. And this is when, the Warren Buffett saying, when the tide goes down, you see who is naked. And this is what now suddenly everybody is fully exposed. Like, okay, what exactly are we going to do? And here you mentioned about a few things, which is no matter how good a plan you create, first of all, there are planning mistakes. Many companies don't plan it at the level of the, what I call it as a, are you able to understand your core KPIs and wiring it to the ground? Meaning, is that actually a responsibility of somebody who
Mm-hmm.
is actually compensated on that? And what are the 5 core KPIs? If it is not all the way goes to a frontline rep or a CS or other person, then the boat is not going, your controls are not connected to the rudder, number
Mm-hmm.
one. So let's assume even if you do all that stuff correctly, no matter how much you do, the market changes quite fast. And how many, if you make 10 assumptions, 4 of them are going to be incorrect over the time. So how are you able to course correct over the time? So we try to do as like you try to do an annual planning. That annual planning, I've been here at now Pleo 2.5 years. We are now the third annual planning. Each time I look at back and say, wow, how far we have improved. So the learning goes back into that and we continuously improve. Now, once that is launched, we also do the quarterly course correction. In some cases, we are trying to go to even weekly course correction. A good example I can give is, let's say you are spending money on digital marketing, which is a big line item for every single SaaS or software scale-ups these days. Now, how many of them measure end to end from the marketing budget all the way to actually money in the bank on our side, right? So that means from all the way to leads created, to opportunities to created, to conversion, to the size of the deal, and how many of them get onboarded and how many of them don't churn. If you look at end to end, and no, not many look at it that way, but if it is off, what do you do? Do you throttle the spend, go fix the areas where it is, and then pick up spend? So do you have the agility to do that? If not, you are going to be wasting money somewhere, shape, or form. So I just gave one example. There are a lot of pathways by which money is being spent. Another example could be the other big cost is people cost. Let's say you're launching a new segment or a new market. Should you hire 2 people, 2 sales reps, or 10? And if you're anytime you go slightly ahead of your skis by some optimistic assumptions, you run into a problem where they are not productive. It leads to other issues and so on. So how do you carefully calibrate and go? And that's the art and the science.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And so you mentioned a couple of things around the weekly, monthly, quarterly cadence here, which is pretty interesting. Are there any other pieces? So we talked about being able to have a strong plan, ideally all the way to the bottom or bottom up, or however you want to kind of explain
Mhm.
that, right?
Yeah.
And then having the awareness and the consciousness of, well, whatever the plan is, we still need to have maneuverability while we execute, right?
Mhm.
Are there any other tenets for you, kind of that kind of bring that execution rhythm to you? And it might be or might not be, by the way. It kind of, I'm just asking if there's another kind of box in your brain that we haven't opened yet on this topic.
I'll give about the people. So, for
Mhm,
instance, I talked about the hiring reps and such.
mhm,
We run something called a capacity planning call because 2 years ago, we had our operating plan, but throughout the second of the year, we were always 10 reps behind. So if you're always 10 reps behind, you're never going to hit the target. As capacity, you are off. So we took the learning and we tightened it to so much. Now we actually have built a predictive model on people. We basically say how many of them are going to get promoted. We can predict how many of them are going to be in the performance plan, are going to leave, or how many of them decided to leave, gave notice, how many of them are going on maternity, paternity. You put all these variables and you can predict what is the capacity up to 3 months ahead. And that means you don't have to wait until a person leaves or something happens, because there is a latency to hire. Because if I send, all right, go ahead and hire, for that, we call it as from publishing a job description to a button a seat. How long does it take? Depending on a market and the at what pay level you're paying, it's going to be anywhere from 3 to 6 months.
mhm,
So how can we do the same forecasting on the capacity, and also bake in the margin? Make sure that you are always not tightly running. If you have to hit 50 million, you have to add, your capacity should be at least 55 to 60 million, because you'll have this volatility in between.
mhm.
And how quickly can you trigger and proactively hire and onboard? So that's another example where you can bring the planning diligence into the process.
One last thing on this, actually, before Mikkel just gave me the sign and I'm ignoring it.
He
One
kicked
last
you
thing
under
on
the
this
desk.
from
I saw that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. One last question on this here. So all of this, I can assume which tool you're using. It's probably going to start with it's probably kind of some spreadsheet to kind of figure some of these pieces out, right? But who's your let's just say the business partner? Is this something that sits in finance? Is this something that sits in revenue operations? Is this something that sits like completely differently? Where do you have that person or that team helping you with all of those insights?
Yeah, at the moment it's a collaboration. It's primarily sits in RevOps in terms of the planning, the tracking, and
Mhm,
also the generating the insights at a monthly level to say, so we look at the insights and make decisions, course corrections at a monthly level. But then
mhm.
it's a collaboration between the people team and the finance team as well, because they
Yeah.
are part of the conversation, because they are going to cost it out, and they're going to also action if there is any kind of hiring, any changes and things like that. So it's a very tight collaboration to ensure. But the bulk of the up to the insight generation sits with the RevOps, planning and insight generation.
So I kind of wanted just to circle back to something you talked about that I found super interesting is basically you're forecasting your future need in terms of capacity. And I think most
Mhm.
of our listeners, they will have some kind of capacity plan in place. And I think what I've seen is very few, they then go to the level. I mean, first off, few go to the level of detail with attrition and stuff like that. But even there's another step, which is the supply side. So basically, you can call it demand plan and how you're managing that side. So have you done any kind of similar exercise on that end? Because at the end of the day, you also want to feed the reps, right? It doesn't sound like
Yeah,
you've had the problem, but I'm just curious to see
yeah.
whether it's because you have something in place that's actually working really well.
So there's always this tension, right? Like even the capacity plan, people capacity plan, it doesn't have to be as complex as what I was saying. If you're growing, let's say sub 30%, if you're growing above 30%, up to 70, 90, 80%, your biggest blocker is people. Now, let's say you solve that. The second problem is the demand generation, right? Like because you cannot hire people faster than you can create demand. And so here, I've never worked in a company where people said, "Stop the pipeline." Too many leads. It's always about there's never enough leads to go around and never enough opportunities. So there, it's a combination of multiple facets, and I wouldn't say we mastered it. So it's about, let's say, the same approach. For demand generation, let's say there are 10 ways, all the way from digital marketing to field marketing events to SDR engine to partnership based. Now you can have the same story. The maturation of each one in every organization is different. Some of them is mature, some of them is starting up. So you need to have the same approach for each one to say what maturation curve you are in, how much you want to invest, and how much you want to double down. So there, I would say our forecasting needs to get even better because there's a lot of external factors involved. And in addition, there is another sublayer, which is about, and this I've seen in every single company I worked for, the whatever demand you have, are you taking the most out of it? So for instance, if a company was generating 100 to 200 leads, I'll give an example. This was in Freshworks early in the day. Every rep was getting close to 250 leads, and they had a target of 1K MRR. And after 4 or 5 years, they had all something like 60 leads, and their target was 3K MRR. So they were able to squeeze more out of the existing leads by higher quality leads, better product market fit, better trained ones. So you're able to convert them better, faster, and to bigger opportunities. So it goes hand in hand along with that.
So we had Pablo Dominguez from Inside Partners here, and they wrote a book. And
I know him very well. Yeah, I know him well, by the way.
So and so he wrote a book with I forgot the other guy. But one of the metaphors in the book was basically this Formula One pit stop thing. I'm not sure if you kind of recollect this, but basically kind of it went from, I don't know, basically a minute. It took a minute to refuel, put the tires on 50 years ago, whenever they started, and it's now down to what is it, 2.5 seconds or something like this, right? So this is the awesomeness about this example is, they didn't jump there and like, okay, from 1 minute to 30 seconds, and then from 30 seconds to 3 seconds. They kind of, basically kind of shaved away second by second over the half century, basically. They kind of got down to this, right? What you just mentioned, like, from 250 leads to 1K, and then it's 60 leads to 3K, it's kind of the same magnitude almost. I haven't done the math, but it sounds like the same magnitude. So I feel many people forget about that stuff. They see like, hey, these improvements, maybe we'll achieve them, maybe not. How do you actually handle this? I mean, is this something where you put stretch goals in front of people, or where you kind of do something else in order to achieve this? Or how do you navigate around this?
Yeah. First of all, Pablo and I work together at AppNexus. We still keep in touch. He's a good friend.
There you go.
You are right, and I love that example as well. Now, to do this example, let's take, if you have somebody had told to someone else, let's go from 1 minute to 3 seconds, they would have laughed you out of the place, right? So
Yeah.
it's more the believing in the art of the possible. And oftentimes, where it fails is most scale-up companies tend to have first-line managers who are actually first-time managers as well, right? And the mindset oftentimes is like, they are afraid of okay, let's go from 1 minute to 30 seconds. They'll freak out because what does it mean? How do you manage? So it's about creating the vision and actually using the insights to say, here are the areas, and set micro goals. Let's go from, let's say, conversion rate. If it is 20%, next quarter, let's go to 23%, to 25%. And it's
Mhm.
constantly, and similarly, other metrics like deal velocity. If it is 60 days, can we close in 55 days, an average to 50 days? And deal size. So it's a combo of three or four many variables, and each one should have a micro goals at a quarterly level, and educating and sharing and making people believe that it is possible. That's the biggest thing. If you're able to make it believe, and that's why
Yeah.
I said the micro goals work a lot well, because you can say, all right, this quarter will improve it this much, second quarter will eat this much, and suddenly you look back 2-3 years later, wow, it went from this point to this point, and it looks very impossible.
And as it's almost a follow-up question on this is and maybe this was because I was a first time manager at that point. But usually my CFO came to me and was like, "Hey Tony, we need to get this conversion rate from 15 to 20%, right? We just need to
Yeah,
do this because money and CAC payback and efficiencies, and I like all of those improvements because they fall fully through to the bottom line. So Tony, you need to figure out how to do this." I mean, my gut reaction always was like, "No, we can't do this," and so forth. And you're right about the belief system. I think that's very powerful. But at the same time, right? I mean, you are the CRO and you work with the front lines. You understand what is possible, what is not possible. And then finance sometimes doesn't, right? And how do you navigate? How do you navigate the side of the planning and the financial planning? And they are also just trying to kind of hit the ambitions that the company is setting out, right? So it's not like
yeah,
the CFO is not coming up with those goals. How do you navigate
yeah.
that? How do you kind of have a good conversation that doesn't end up, well, let's agree to disagree and let's just lock in what we don't believe in, right? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, let's come to the CFO dynamic second. The first one I would say is any material productivity improvement needs to be linked to solidly defined initiatives in the planning
Yeah.
stage itself. So just like when you go back to when I talked about this three-dimensional cube of different cells, and you're able to link key metrics to targets and things like that, anywhere you assume the productivity, let's say pipeline generation capacity is going to increase this year, by end of this year, 20-30%. How are you going to do that? And this is what we capture via OKRs. We don't capture the targets via OK. That's business as usual. But anytime you have to do a step change by being improving something or innovating something or building something that didn't exist, that's what's captured as part of the OKR process. And the
Mhm.
OKR process will have a clear milestone at a quarterly level. So an example is the conversion rate you talked about. Conversion rate, if it has to be improved, lead quality should improve, and enablement of the sales rep should improve. The collateral and everything they're using, the pitch, how do they do it, has to improve. Product market fit has to improve. So is that lined up, each one, is there initiatives lined up against that? So that's the core thing that gives you some confidence. Is that assumption hope, or you have a strategy behind it and a plan of action
Yeah.
behind it with
Yeah.
clear commitment from various parts of the organization, right? Otherwise, so that joint dialogue is what, when you go to a CFO or you have a CFO CRO dialogue, of course, there needs to be an inherent tension in the organization to basically say, how can we grow faster with less, right? That's the classic dilemma. And but if you make it very factual and go clear assumption by assumption and link it back to different things and ask whether that's a resource, the conversation becomes more factual. So an
Mhm.
example is, if I say I need to have an enablement team to drive enablement to improve it by 10%, my next question is there somebody doing enablement? Do they have the right tools? Is there a budget for external trainers and so on? And is that funded? And are you going to fund it? And is there a business case for that and such? So you need to make sure it's all very factual. Then it becomes a collaborative conversation rather than based on hope and emotions and such.
I think the other piece, and maybe this is kind of maybe it's almost the same question packed slightly differently, right? There's always this balance you need to strike between the ambitious goal versus what can you also do. And in
Mm-hmm.
this scenario, I'm thinking especially also. So we talked about either the lateral conversation with the CFO or even with the CEO and board, but you also have a team underneath you that you also need to kind of interface with on the same coin.
Yeah.
Kind of, how do you go about
Yeah.
that piece? So you mentioned getting people to commit and so on.
And this comes to, incentives and alignment and also mindsets, right? So you are absolutely right. CRO's role is now interfacing with a 360 view of people, and also involving the product too, because you can't make a revenue target or a prediction without seeing what's coming. What's the forecast in terms of, is there any new monetizable product that's coming down the pipe, and can I attach a value towards it? So it's a joint conversation, and the most one of the most tricky one is also with your team, and and I think if you have a team with a growth mindset and a core belief that this could be improved another 20% and such, number one. If the no belief is there, and then the game is lost already. Like then there will be only stiff resistance to say it's perfect, it can't go below. And the F1 example is a good example. Back in the day, one minute would have been like awesome. Everybody said it's impossible. How do we bring it to? So you need to have the talent density that actually also has a constructive mindset that more is possible. Number one. Number two is how are the incentives and structures aligned? Is there a safe space to fail? When people take these big bets, will they be penalized, or will they be rewarded even if they fail? So that's a very important kind of a psychological safety that you provide to say, you know what, I'll take a stretch target, but I know my gut says based on all the planning, this is what I could hit, but I'll take a stretch target. But don't penalize. So you need to bake in the safety margins, how you take all the bets. You need to know which ones are sure shot, which ones are stretch goals and bets, and somehow bring that into the conversation for your board and CFO as well. So that way we can set the right expectations, that it's not panic situation if a bet doesn't materialize.
We have time for a last question. I wanted to do something that you actually failed to do, because you asked for questions on LinkedIn. And we actually got a question that I want to float by you, Arun, because you're in fintech, which is a very fast-paced environment. A lot has been happening there over the last couple of years. We talked a bit about regulation and so on, right? So how do you actually manage external factors and external change? Do you have any examples of something you've experienced here?
Yeah, I think this is something new for me, to be honest. I've never worked in a highly regulated environment, so I'm learning myself. And so some of the areas where I've learned is things take longer, and I've made some mistakes. So when I say things take longer, if you want to launch in a new country, and then you have to get some regulatory approvals in some cases. In some cases, you need to do some compliance checks where external policy enforcement bodies are involved. Or you also have to rely on some partners to accelerate your go-to-market. And oftentimes, depending on how big you are, your partners prioritize their own revenue. And if you go to a very new market like the US, you are a small person there, and it takes longer. So it's a learning process, and I think we did have some hiccups along the way, but it's a learning. I would say we learned our lessons, and next year will be even better.
Arun, this was fantastic. I learned a bunch. I'm very sure that a lot of people that are listening learning a bunch also. I think obviously the applicability is sometimes difficult, right? Because you guys are on a very specific, very unique, very awesome journey. And then a lot of other people are like in a spectrum usually below that. But still kind of having that understanding, carrying that way of thinking into your execution, I think it's extremely powerful. And Arun, thank you so much for spending time here, and thank you so much for enlightening us.
And Tony and Michael, thank you for the opportunity. I also want to say that to the listeners, just because we are slightly ahead, don't worry. I think it's part and parcel of your learning process, whether you are a 5 million company or 20 million company, and there is a lot of learnings along the way. And feel free to reach out as well if you have any questions or any guidance. I'm happy to share, pay it forward.
Wonderful, Arun. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Mikkel, and have a good day.